Following on from my previous video, I'd like to address a few points. As usual, one of the big problems with philosophy is its language. Its language is rational. Its language denotes rationality. So then if you are trying to describe something that is, or to put it bluntly, outside the scope of a narrow rationality or outside the grasp of a narrow rationality, you are immediately in deep trouble. You are going to be using a language that was designed to make the world and make things look more rational for the purpose of trying to say, well, there is something outside that narrow rationality that we feel compelled to embrace because we traditionally feel that we get safety, security, power, and dominance probably through this manner of using terminology to pin things down, using concepts and ideas to make them more under our control, or at least seem to be. So basically the tradition that Bataille is in is that one which questions very, very strongly the tradition of this other, more conventional, more normative philosophy, and says, well, you know, you are trying to conceptualize, you are trying to pin things down using language, but in doing so, not only do you miss out on observing or experiencing the wider part of reality, the wider portion of existence, but you also don't really capture this broader part either. You just restrict your observation of it, and you make the world seem kind of stiffly rational or stiffly predictable when it actually isn't. It's actually different from the way conventional philosophy makes it seem. So the problem is that you can and you can't really use the language of philosophy to criticize itself. Every time you try to use a philosophical concept and you use that concept to criticize another philosophical concept, you're still building up these walls of rationality, or really seeming rationality. So if we say, well, there is such a thing as dialectics, equal and opposite forces, it makes the world seem rational. And then there's another trap too, sort of language trap, linguistic trap, conceptual trap, really, in that if you say something like I did in the previous video, that it's like light and darkness, and darkness is the exact conceptual term that Bataille himself uses, and Nietzsche in fact also uses in another context to talk about the denial of these non-rational elements in reality. So you use that term darkness, and then people think, well, if it's a dialectical opposition, it means kind of irrationality or madness. You're embracing madness. Why would you do that? And so then people come up with the idea, well, it's not really madness, it's a third term, somewhere between kind of madness and not madness, which is kind of a way to conceptualize it. Probably as far as you can go, using the language of philosophy to try to self-correct it. But in the end, I think the problem is with philosophical language as such, and with the fact that it does tend to mislead us, because we latch onto a concept, and we latch onto another concept, and we latch onto a third concept, and now we think we've got it when we really haven't got it, even slightly, not at all. So it's perplexing. So that's my reaction when I see people are giving me all these wonderful links to look at. I feel like it's perplexing. The information is in the text. The information is a highly qualitative, very good quality. But the ability to have the mind that actually experiences or penetrates the text in a way that's not just limited to a reduction to narrow rationality, that's a whole other thing. You may think you understand what's being said, but you actually don't. I mean, you can conceptualize it, you can grasp it abstractly, but you actually don't. And so that's why the language of literature is, I think, more useful. And even that presents problems because it's also words are concepts and we need to grasp them conceptually. So even that, you have to kind of break through the language barrier actually to get anywhere with what I call the shamanic text. Otherwise you don't. But I will describe in a kind of phenomenological manner how I encountered the text Black Sunlight. Well, there you go. Black sunlight. You know, it's a contradiction. It's going to push you beyond your conceptual limits, maybe. It's early in the morning here. So I'm still waking up. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing when it comes to delivering a video. You probably notice I'm not paying too much or giving too much eye contact to the camera, and I'm still a little bit dreamy and sleepy. So I'll try and make a few more videos on similar topics, maybe today, because I have some time. So yeah, the sense of the way philosophy struggles to try to express its more Nietzschean dimension is to try and say there's an instability of matter, or it's a third term, or something like that. Trying to get you to sort of move into a zone where you kind of roughly approximate the sense of it, but you're not actually understanding it, in fact, unless you have the experience of it. Now, Mary Chira's Black Sunlight it can give you an experience of it. It can give you a limit experience. A limit experience. A limit experience, I suppose. It can give you that, but you are really required to experience the visceral nature of it and the sense of being destabilized by it. And there are lots of injunctions to be destabilized. There are things like a juddering plunge that you keep, like the earth goes way under you. So we experienced the juddering plunge, and it's really destabilizing conceptually. But you can't see it as an error in the writing. You've got to experience it and say it's a kind of it's framing and shifting in such a manner that it does work on your mental apparatus, both consciously and unconsciously. And if you keep reading the book, and you need to read it about 20 or 30 times till you can read it smoothly, then finally you get it as a whole message. It's sort of an imprinting on your mind. It's a reprogramming of your mind, and it is through some kind of sense of well, I found it traumatic, in fact, but also liberatory. So it was two things at the same time. And finally I saw, and finally I understood. But it's written for people of my background, I do believe. It's written for people like me. My background experience was that I was cut off from the Garden of Eden. That was my land of birth. I was expelled from it I became kind of, I think, at least in my parents' eyes, a sort of refugee, somebody who was expelled from Africa, not needed, not wanted there, pretty much, or they at least felt that there wasn't much room for development if we had stayed. So a lot of people, a lot of the white ex-colonialists took the gap, which means that they found a way to exit, and then they went through the exit. You know, Red Rover crossover, that game. You got to find a gap. And the guards in the center are trying to stop you from crossing over, but you cross over anyway. You find a gap, you go through it. Except that the term that was used by the whites themselves back then, taking the gap, was kind of implying you're taking an opportunity to escape the heat, and you can't really take it. All of the time there were these motifs of toughness or weakness, strength or cowardice, and taking the gap was kind of, off you go, can't handle Africa, back to Europe. Yeah, it was a kind of ironic put down. So, you know, I was one of those whose parents took the gap eventually, not immediately, but eventually. And then it was like, you can't come back. Even the government made it seem so. They said, like, once you get another nationality and different passport, you're not Zimbabwean. You've made your choice, so you can't come back. You can't live back there. And there was another prohibition, which was that the whites were extremely injured emotionally and in terms of their sense of identity. And they were like, they developed a false narrative, which was that we are going back to where there is civilization, where I guess the culture is proper and true. White culture is proper and true, and we are, you know, we're going somewhere better, where we actually belong, and we hate you. We don't want to belong there anymore. We despise it. We're better than that, kind of thing, which was untrue, very, very untrue, a false narrative, because most of the whites that left, their emotions remained in Africa, and they became very bitter, unfortunate people who kept telling themselves the false narrative that now they were better off, when they actually didn't feel at all that they were. So, but you had to maintain the false narrative, otherwise, once again, you were considered a weakling. You had to maintain the tough veneer, even if you didn't feel it. And you had to say, I will never go back there. That place rejected me, and I'm better than it. So you had to have that manner about you. That was what was taught to me, and was basically reinforced among the white expat population. So for me to go back into a even conceptual environment, even a conceptual world that had to do with Africa, was transgressive, and it was trying to beat my way back into paradise, despite having been disbarred from it and prevented from entering it again. But you had to face the war. You had to face that the damage that was done in Rhodesia and Zimbabwe had been extreme, and people were emotionally damaged. So Black Sunlight was a way for me to face those aspects, and that's why it was traumatic. But it was also a way to get back in from where I've been blocked out of. And that was through this limit experience, like where you find that the world that you left behind is still viscerally there. You can still experience it in all of its glory, in all of its trauma. It's still there for you. And who would have thought? So I broke down those mental barriers that said, you can't go back. Paradise is finished. Stay here and grit your teeth and pretend it's better. I broke down those mental barriers through this process of reading Black Sunlight, and at the end it really is a limit experience, because the author takes you through all these very, very extreme situations which are historical or references to history, which are very violent at times, which do involve these juddering plunges where your concepts are no longer supporting you, and where you're forced to open your mind to the next stage, the next framing of the new set of concepts in a somewhat new narrative structure. It keeps changing. And it reprogrammed me to realize that I was still in touch with visceral nature, still in touch with historical processes, still part of them, and would never be really cut off, would never be disbarred or banned or denied. And what the colonialists had done to themselves was cutting off their nose to spite their face. They could still go back. And then after that, I went back. So at the end of the book, I literally went back to Zimbabwe, and I found that it was still there for me. At the end of the book, the author it's very shamanic, I think. He's just like, he's been through all these processes. He's gone to the limit of what he can say about these experiences. And he basically said, well, that's the limit of language. Language it's so overabundant, it falls down on us. We drown in it, but in the end, there's just the bare bones of the self. That's what we've got. That's what he has. And that's the limit. That's the limit that he found. It's kind of despairing image, but I think also in a very paradoxical way, it opens up the mind. And when you see it in that manner, you feel that you're embracing nature, you're embracing organic reality, that it's all viscerally true, and it's all there for you, and you can't try to pin it down with language, and you shouldn't try. It's still there for you, even if you miss the concepts, you get them wrong, you are unable to express yourself. It's still there for you. Reality in life, organic nature, the force of history, visceral existence, the trauma, the connectivity, the war, Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. In some ways, they're all still there, and they can't be denied through concepts. And that is liberation, when you get to that limit and you see it suddenly, that those aspects that you had conceptually chopped yourself up from are still there, and they haven't disappeared. If anything, they become stronger through the limit experience. Well, that's what I experienced. So I think literature can do it sometimes, but and you have to be very willing, very, very willing, very experimental. You have to face a lot of danger and potential damage to your psyche if you allow yourself to be reprogrammed like that. It's very dangerous. I can't emphasize enough, but it may be worth it for you if you really hate your life at the moment, as I did, and you find it's just getting drier and drier and less sustaining. You may take that risk if you are able, and if you have the opportunity. And there it is. So the limit experience, it's better understood, I think, through literature and through actually experiencing it, if possible. It's difficult to explain in philosophical terms.